recording. Well, good morning again. Happy Thursday, AP Gov. Today, we're going to look at the final chapter, the last of our textbook. We're going to put old Wape Dog to bed here, and we're going to be looking at chapter 16, the media. It's unusual that this is saved until the very, very end, because I do think we've kind of covered some things as we've gone through. So we'll be able to do that here in a second. So I'm going to go through the notes. It's pretty brief. There's a lot more stuff that I've added as bonus content. If you've already seen it, I posted it to the Unit 5 page. I posted it to the announcements. It's on the remote learning page. You're looking for chapter 16 in class notes, the media. But yeah, there's bonus content. There's things that aren't addressed in the textbook that I feel would be worth our time to at least just review. So let's go up here. Let's share screen. And all right, that load. Here we go. All right, chapter 16, the media. As we go through, guys, remember, if you have questions, throw it in the chat box. I'll try to get to those as we go through. But again, when Unit 5, we're looking at all the parts of political participation. You're looking at elections, you're looking at political parties, but the media falls into that category of linkage institutions. So all the things, interest groups, the media, political parties, they are involved in the government process, they're involved in the political process, but they're not a formal part. They are not have powers officially described in the Constitution, but that's kind of where we start. So again, we're looking at how increased media choices, how consumer-driven media that's driven by advertising dollars, and new technology have impacted our political knowledge. And I think this is a good place to start. So media politics, I mean, very rarely anymore are you meeting people, or a predominant amount of people don't get their news from a daily newspaper anymore. Even, you might get the newspaper, but that's not where people go for their news first. I mean, we are in a 24-hour news cycle as apparent to everything on social media and everything on cable news. A newspaper is just once a day isn't fast enough. We've also kind of moved away from radio, but we see a development or an involvement from newspapers to the radio, to television news, and now with the internet and the impact of social media is where most people get their news, and I'll show you that in the graph here in a second. So this ends up being one of those things, a press conference. There's old President Trump. This is pre-social distancing. You can see how close everyone is seated next to one another. But a press conference is a way that the government, in this case, the president, or it could be Nancy Pelosi, it could be Mitch McConnell, it could be anybody in the government. I just got a phone call during my previous Zoom with US History from Cory Gardner's office saying that they're doing a town hall. So a press conference is kind of how the government conveys their opinion and their goals to the public. They use the press, they use the media to say, hey, here's what we're working on, here's what we think we need to do. Another type of media that we've mentioned before is investigative journalism. And investigative journalism, we see it down here with the Watergate scandal and specifically the Pentagon Papers. You see, these reporters here were the ones that broke, Watergate and kind of exposed the Nixon White House. But investigative journalism is anytime you see the guy, they chase the contractor down in the car and they put a mic in his face and they're like, hey, are you ripping off old people? Investigative journalism is a branch of journalism where they're kind of going out and looking at not just the wrongs in society, but kind of exposing the wrongs or the hypocrisy within government itself. So examples of the print media, obviously the Denver Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I mean, every one of those has an online presence, but they are predominantly a newspaper. They are that print media. It's something tangible you can hold. Most of these newspapers are going to be held or owned by major corporations. The Rocky Mountain News was an example. That was a newspaper that kind of competed with the Denver Post for decades no longer exists. The Colorado Sun, even though it's not a physical paper anymore, is kind of a rebirth of this independent journalism. But most major newspapers in this country, big city newspapers, are going to be owned by corporations. Um, Typically, the readers of Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, those readers are politically informed. However, they're subject to declining subscriptions, and they are struggling financially. I can't tell the Denver Post how many times they call me to offer me a cheap deal on a subscription. I'm like, yeah, I get it for free through my school. Like, you can't argue with free. There are fewer numbers of people subscribing to digital media or to print media anymore. So you see the newspapers in decline. Uh, I'll restructure this slide here. Let me just see if I can do it while you're on here. Yay. So radio and television, they shift the conversation towards appearance and away from political achievements and views. So we start to see, like we saw in the 1960 debate with Nixon and Kennedy, physical appearance and the way you appear and the way that you look becoming more and more important in the media. These two terms, we can see that right now in our social media choices. Narrowcasting refers to aiming these media messages at specific segments of the public defined by values and preferences. So in layman's terms, or in simpler terms, narrowcasting means no longer is it one or two or three news sources. There are dozens, if not hundreds of different news sources out there. If you are a rural farmer, you're probably going to be subscribing to a different, you're going to get your news from a different source than someone who is a Wall Street stockbroker. Narrowcasting means there's just more and more specific ways that the media can address information in the public. And then this term here, selective exposure. This refers to viewing news that you agree with or news that aligns to your political ideology. So if you're a conservative, more than likely you're watching Fox News. If you're a liberal, more than likely you're watching MSNBC or CNN. But that selective exposure, you look at your social media feed. If you have people on there, if you have organizations on there that are the opposite or disagree with your opinions or your political ideologies, you go up there and you unsubscribe or you block. So now you're kind of living in this echo chamber where you only hear from people or you only hear from organizations that agree with you. So no wonder, if you're watching Fox News, no wonder you're going to have a specific viewpoint because it's guided by what they put on the air. If you're only listening to MSNBC, you're only going to be getting the information from that perspective. You're not putting yourself out there to get a challenging or alternative perspective to kind of push your thinking and ideas. So again, we put, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, the rise of cable news. It's no longer 5 or 6 o'clock news at night with one guy on one channel, and that's where everybody gets their news from Walter Cronkite. You could watch news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on any one of these channels. CNN's use of breaking news is questionable if you're running the same breaking news story for 12 hours. That being said, here's my asterisk side note to you guys. If you haven't already decided to kind of mute the news to be inundated with a lot of this stuff 24 hours a day, I don't think it's the best choice for you right now. I know myself, I've really limited myself to about 10 minutes in the morning and about 10 minutes at night. And I'll get what's important and move on from there. And the rest of the time I'm watching Chopped. Okay, back to the notes. Here's a great graphic that I pulled. You start to look at percent who regularly watch Fox News. You're seeing that predominantly Republican. Surprise, surprise. You're seeing CNN predominantly Democrat. You see MSNBC predominantly Democrat. You can see that green here, your independents. Obviously, you're usually in the middle here, but there should be no new information on this slide of kind of where people who identify with one party or the other are getting their news. All right, the impact of the internet. Obviously, you know, some of you guys don't have Facebook, but you got Instagram. If you got Snapchat, maybe you have a Tumblr, maybe you don't, or you're on Twitter. That's my big guy up here with Reddit. The impact of the internet has a greater and faster impact than any other news source in the history of our country. It has a faster adoption rate, meaning more people are on it. You know, in the last election, most people, and again, when we talk most people, we're talking older folks, are getting their news from Facebook. So you see this birth of fake news, you see the rise of unvetted news sources because anyone can put any thought there onto the internet. Let's see here, I got a question. Oh, Morgan, I have nothing. Cool, Morgan, good to see you, buddy. So here is another graphic. This represents the percentage of people that have used it in the past. I think this is the past year. I'm sorry, I don't have the key up there, but you can see, you know, Facebook, Instagram, Facebook Messenger have higher usage rates than something like Google Hangouts, Tumblr. I'd be curious to see if the WhatsApp kind of goes, that's a little bit higher. Reddit's there at a reasonable 17, 18%, but Snapchat. But you can see that most people are using some form of social media in their lives regularly, and that's where, again, a lot of people are getting their news. So have we been in class and had we had more things going on? I would encourage you to go through. These are some of those political blogs that I cited at the beginning of the year for current events. Breitbart News, it's definitely a hard right news source. It's Steve Bannon's kind of baby over there. Daily Kos, the Drudge Report. We've been on 538 quite a bit, so you guys should be familiar with that. The Huffington Post, Talking Points Memo. These are all links to those political blogs. I'd encourage you, if you are, you know, if you're definitely a progressive liberal, like go dig around Drudge Report, go onto Breitbart and kind of see, you know, push yourself to see an alternative viewpoint on an issue, kind of see how they're covering it. If you are, you know, hard right MAGA bro, like maybe hop on Huffington Post, see what they're saying. Unfortunately, Huffington Post is most of a reposting and reblogging. They don't have a lot of original stuff, but they have some. So these two graphics I pulled from your textbook, the change in American news sources. So you're seeing, you know, folks are still getting, you know, majority of folks are getting their news from television, but you're seeing this spike in the use of the internet, the declining use of the newspaper, and radio is holding steady, but again, it's pretty small. And then the pace of adoption. So it took 35 years for 25% of the American population to use a telephone. So telephone was around for 35 years before we got 25% of the country using it. Radio was about 31 years. Television, 26. Mobile phones, 13. But you can see right here, the internet. It took 7 years from the, you know, kind of why, you know, beginning use of the internet for 25% of American households to be using it. So it's very, very, very fast that we shifted towards the internet. All right, so any questions on media? Talk about print media, newspapers. We talk about television, you know, cable news. You talk about the rise of internet and blogs. So those are kind of types of media. Now we kind of go into, this one's just, I find this one really interesting, and why it gets its own segment, I don't know. But regulating content and ownership. I always like to know where my news comes from. And if you can explain how consolidating and ideologically driven news media have impacted the delivery of the news. So we're getting news from fewer sources these days when you start to think about it. So again, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they're the ones that regulate over-the-air radio and television. They are an example of that bureaucratic agency, an independent regulatory agency. They monitor the use of public airwaves. The FCC does not monitor cable. The FCC has said no one company can own more than 35% of a market. And what that means is you can't have one company that owns the television station, the newspaper, and the radio station. You can't have complete market saturation from one company because then you really have a monopoly on information. Fair treatment refers to both party candidates may purchase time. A news company, a television station can't say, I'm only going to sell ad time to the Republicans, I'm only going to sell ad time to the Democrats. It has to be fair treatment. That's why a lot of times you'll see, like on 9 News or Channel 7, around election time, they will give each candidate a percentage of time, especially in state races, for free. And they will say, okay, you can have this town hall time. Now I have to give it the equal amount of time to someone else. But again, reminder, this is public airwaves. This is not cable. So this is your ABC, your NBC, your CBS, Fox. This is not CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News. I like this graphic a lot. I like these little bubble graphs. So who owns the big TV networks? You can see Time Warner. Time Warner owns HBO. They own CNN. They own True TV, TNT, TBS. You can kind of see who owns what. Disney. Disney owns a ton. They own ESPN. They own ABC. Okay. NBC, you can see NBC is Hulu, USA, Bravo, MSNBC. You can see CBS over here. So CBS and Showtime. CBS owns Comedy Central. So you can kind of see here that these, 1 or 2 organizations own a ton of media outlets. And I always push back on people and go, okay, so CBS late night show is Stephen Colbert. Watch the guests that Stephen Colbert has on a typical normal day, not during this, but on a typical day. I bet they're going to come from CBS TV shows. They're going to come from Showtime. They're going to come from, Comedy Central. They're going to come from CBS Sports. They're going to be CBS families. The same with NBC. Jimmy Fallon is going to be hosting people that are on, Bravo or USA or NBC shows. We could start to look at like movie, these companies also own movie production houses. They own music. It's not just television. They own a lot of them. Here's another one, Disney. It's the same information, just a little bit different. So here, look, Disney owns ABC, Pixar, Miramax, Marvel. Time Warner owns HBO, but they own Warner Brothers Studios, CBS, NFL.com, Jeopardy, 60 Minutes. So again, this kind of sees where General Electric owns Comcast and NBC, Universal Pictures. So that's going to give you an idea of these companies, what they own. So how do they shape American politics today? I put this phrase in here: if it bleeds, it leads. Now more than ever, we can see that, things that are maybe sometimes negative, violent, kind of downer topics, those are going to be the things at the top of the hour. They're not going to, the news on a normal day is never going to start out with everything's great and awesome, and here's a water skiing squirrel. Like, it's going to start off with, some of these more negative, gory, like it's the same idea. Why do we stop and stare at car accidents when we drive by? You hear this morbid fascination. So the news media is going to kind of focus on some of these negative things, and they're going to put it at the top of the hour because that's what's going to get them viewers. So some terms to know. These are just things that are going to come up with when you talk about the media. A beat, it refers to an area of expertise or coverage. So, hey, what's your beat? I'm a White House reporter. I cover the Senate. I cover the Pentagon. Oh, I'm an education reporter. Oh, I'm a traffic. So their beat is their area that a reporter focuses on. They're not going to cover everything all the time. Sometimes they cover one specific thing. It's called their beat. A trial balloon. That's an intentional leak to the press used to gauge political reaction. So sometimes some source will anonymously tweet something and kind of see if the media picks up on it. They're kind of trying to gauge the public's reaction. Are people going to get really mad about this? They're going to kind of leak that out there. A sound bite. So if you have a whole speech and then they just narrow it down to a few seconds, that's a sound bite. It's just a tiny bit of a clip. It's 7 seconds long, short clip or quote used to guide the conversation. Bias is what news is reported. There's a media bias. Some news is going to be reported, some news is not going to be reported. It kind of depends on where you're getting your news source, how biased It is, and unfortunately, in recent time, a lot of that's been called into question of kind of what are news organizations covering versus what aren't they covering. And Talking Heads. Oh, here's my funny joke. Talking Heads, great band, but what the College Board would want you to know, it's the style of media where someone's talking to the camera. Much like this, I would consider myself a talking head today. Uh, but you got some cartoons here, the trial balloon, where Trump is tweeting out back with Obama wiretapping him. He's kind of like floating this idea out there to see if people pick up on it. That's Calvin and Hobbes kind of talking about that if it bleeds, it leads. But the easiest way to remember a talking head, it's The Office. Okay, anytime that they cut away to someone kind of giving a one-on-one interview, that's what they refer to as talking heads. This is what you see the talking heads as, these guys, and they're interviewing folks. This is this talking head journalism where you get a bunch of people and they just start yelling at each other. And that's the band Talking Heads. You should look it up. They're pretty good. Public agenda. News organizations define the topics that are most important by selecting issues to focus on. And this is where more attention is given to the president than any other branch or organization. Okay. More people, more news stories are out there about Trump than there are about the Senate or about the House of Representatives or the Supreme Court. They just, for some reason, because it's one guy and it's easier to cover, more attention is paid to the president than any other branch. And then the function of the media as a watchdog, their job, no matter who is president, whether you got Trump in office, whether you have Obama in office, the point of the media is to kind of make sure that the government is answers to the public and calls them out and questions them. It's not, it's not that they're not patriotic. If it's not that they shouldn't just be yes men to whoever is in office, whoever, it doesn't matter. The media's job is to call out hypocrisy and to question and to push and explain yourself. And unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit of that kind of creating a negative relationship between the president and the press. So, sorry, that's their job. That's their job. So you can see Trump here scolding the media, calling them bad dogs. Again, kind of that's that tumultuous. They're watchdogs. This goes to the watchdog function of the media. Again, they're a key linkage institution between people and the government. Their watchdog function helps restrict politicians, and the press can be characterized as liberal or conservative. So I threw a couple terms that aren't in the book that I would like you to kind of be aware of. Gatekeeper. Whether it's broadcast news, internet, or other form of communication, the media is a gatekeeper. They kind of they allow the stories they want to cover, available to the public. They can control what is heard and what isn't heard. The adversarial role of the media, the idea that the press is suspicious of, not nationally, naturally suspicious of officials, and sometimes writes embarrassing stories. Like, somebody gets caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. It's the adversarial role of the press to run that. If you get no other term today, get this one: horse race journalism. Okay, we've talked about it before. It's this whole thing back when we had a dozen or 20 people running for the Democratic nomination. Oh, today Bernie Sanders to 20%, Elizabeth Warren 19. It's like they're calling a horse race. They keep track and make, say who's up in the polls, who's down in the holes. They're covering an election like a horse race. So this horse race or scorekeeper, that's one of those terms definitely I think would be fair game. I've already used this today, the echo chamber, that you're just getting your pre-existing ideas reinforced by hearing consistent messages that agree with you. And this bonus content, this might be something we look at in the weeks to come. This is one of those things like, gosh, I wish we had time to, and if we, I might like to break you guys up into some smaller little groups, but I added some advertisements from different races. So the Eisenhower one, Citizens for Kennedy, Kennedy, we've seen that one. The Daisy Girl ad we've seen. I believe I've shown you Morning in America, but then you look here at the tank ads, windsurfing, that was the George Bush, John Kerry ad. Swift boats, I know we looked at. It's 3 a.m., Two Americas. This living room candidate website is awesome because it's all the political ads. But yeah, I added that in there because as part of the media, when we want to look at how the campaigns use the media to shape their message, the best and easiest example of that are campaign ads. So I kind of added that in there. What I'd like to do, maybe looking ahead, maybe into the next week or two, or a couple weeks out, depending on what our plans are, is to look at some presidential campaigns from 84 to 2016 and kind of compare ads and look at that. So that would be something fun we could do. But at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Any questions for you guys? Okay. So I'm looking right here. I at 11:29. Unfortunately, I have an 11:30 that I need to get on to. Phoenix current events, canceled them. I put the scores in for people, and if you benefited, great. If you didn't, I exempted you from it. Current events, we're not going to do for right now until we have a better idea what the rest of the year looks like. Because okay, so those are the chapter 16 notes. I will post the video to YouTube here in a little bit and get on that. Take a look at the 16 guided reading questions, and then the FRQ, we'll look at that tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We'll look at the FRQ number 2 and go through and kind of discuss that. So if you have any questions, I'm sorry I have to cut this short, but hop on, shoot me an email. Take some time. If you are getting bogged down with other work, guys, take a breather. Don't worry about it. Get to it when you get to it. Again, I just want you guys to be able to get through this stuff. But on that note, I'm sorry, I got to dip out. I'll post the video to YouTube. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. Okay? Later, Josh. I'll post the thing. We got a whole month. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.